Good morning. Welcome to the third and final day of the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. I'm Lawrence Bender. I'm an attorney here in Bismarck, and I also serve as Vice President of the North Dakota Petroleum Council Board of Directors. We have a tremendous lineup of events for you to hear today. We'll be hearing from some of our Bakken CEOs. Kendall with Denbury will be making a presentation. Bob Phillips with Crestwood Midstream will also be here today. And then Bill Berry with Continental Resources will be presenting as well. We'll be joined by Lynn Helms, the Director of the North Dakota Petroleum Council, the North Dakota Industrial Commission, and Congressman Kelly Armstrong, and last but not least, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Before we launch into today's lineup, I'd like to give you a quick update on the conference. We were a bit nervous when we planned this event on how many people we'd attend, but we just had an absolutely tremendous turnout, as you have seen. We've had over 2,600 registrants from all over the country, and we're very, very pleased at the turnout. Once again, we want to thank the 75 sponsors and the 270 exhibitors who came out and decided to present at this event. Now, to start the final day of the conference, it's my pleasure to introduce our first guest, North Dakota Congressman Kelly Armstrong. Congressman Armstrong was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 2018. He serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, which has broad jurisdiction over climate matters. Congressman Armstrong is a lifelong North Dakotan. He has a background in law and business. Kelly opened up a law firm in Dickinson, North Dakota in 2004. He joined the family oil company in 2011 and also the family agricultural business in 2012. He was elected to the North Dakota Senate for District 36 and served in that capacity for 2 terms. And then in 2018, he was elected to the United States House of Representatives. Unfortunately, Congressman Armstrong could not be with us here today because of business he has in D.C., but he will be appearing by video.
Greetings all, and welcome to the Williston Basin Petroleum Conference. I wish I could join you in person, as this event is absolutely one of my favorites. As most of you know, I grew up in the oil and gas industry, and I'm lucky to call you all my friends. And first, I'd like to thank you for your hard work and dedication to ensuring that North Dakota remains a top oil and gas producing state. The shale revolution began right here in North Dakota, and it has helped pave the way towards American energy independence and ensuring our country's national security. Thanks to the innovations refined right here in the Bakken, American energy security is a geopolitical advantage that is reaping benefits for our country and the world. Iran and other bad actors no longer have the leverage to wreak havoc on world energy markets. Because of this, our military and national security teams are better able to make calculated responses that help advance our long-term strategic goals. Yet despite these successes, unelected bureaucrats at alphabet soup federal agencies are implementing business-killing regulations without regard for the people and industries they affect. Regulations like the Clean Power Plan, Waters of the U.S., and Paris Climate Accord are just job-killing endeavors masquerading as feel-good rules. We know that our status as an energy powerhouse was hard-fought and can be easily lost if we don't have the policies that support responsible development of America's vast natural resources. Over the 4 years of President Trump's administration, we saw that when you reduce regulatory burden, allow states to regulate, and reduce barriers to entry, businesses and energy markets thrive, and North Dakota communities grow. This is why I'm concerned about the recent policies and decisions from President Biden's administration that jeopardize our country's energy independence, national security, and the millions of jobs created and supported by this industry throughout the country. The never-ending saga and constant litigation associated with the Dakota Access Pipeline is just one example of an infrastructure project that has been vetted and operating for years without issue. Now, it is at risk of being shut down due to activist litigation and political pressure. This comes on the heels of President Biden's decision to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline after it was subject to maybe the most rigorous review process in history. Events like this conference and organizations such as the Petroleum Council are essential to our fight against the policies and politicians that threaten the way of life for so many in Western North Dakota. And in North Dakota, we are the best stewards of our abundant resources, and we need to continue to push back against the bureaucrats in Washington who try to dictate how we utilize them. In DC, I continue to advocate for North Dakota's energy workers, but I need your help to keep up the pressure. I hear from many of you often, and our voice is always best when we work together. Please continue to reach out to me with your strong advocacy for our industry. And speaking of supporting North Dakota energy, it is my honor to introduce the next speaker, who is one of our biggest supporters. As the director of the North Dakota Department of Mineral Resources, Lynn Helms has been an invaluable asset to North Dakota's energy producers and lawmakers. If there is anyone who is an expert in North Dakota's energy and development, it is Lynn. He continues to do a great job for our state, and we are lucky to have his experience on our side. And I am proud and pleased to call him a good personal friend. Thank you all for joining us, or for allowing me to join you virtually today, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a
Well, good morning, oil and gas. Thank you for coming to our Bismarck Petroleum Conference. Thank you for coming to our great state of North Dakota and investing your capital, investing your time, your treasure, and your talent in making North Dakota a better and better place every day. It's wonderful to see you this morning. It's been great to spend time with you this week, and I'm just so happy to be able to address you this morning and talk about what I see coming in the next decade. Thank you also so much for the relationship that we have developed over the last 20 years. I have always been treated with respect and gratitude by this oil and gas industry, and what you have done for the state of North Dakota is just remarkable. I want to spend a little time talking about that. But of course, we know that we just came out of a pandemic year, a year like none of us had ever seen. Maybe some of our grandparents had seen this with the Spanish flu outbreak, but we'd never seen anything like this. And of course, when something crazy like that happens, I always have to consult my friend Ole. And so I asked Ole, what do you remember from the year of the pandemic? And he says, I remember the day I thought Lena was going to kill me. Whoa, that's a little weird, okay, during a pandemic. I said, what happened, Ole? He says, well, I come home at dark, and I was so drunk, and I come in the house, and Lena is sitting there, and she is so mad. She is madder than I've ever seen Lena before. And she says to me, Ole, where have you been? And I just told her, I've been out drinking beer and fishing with Sven. And she goes, I took off work all afternoon, and I came home to take care of you. Ole goes, why? Well, because I heard you call in this morning and you told your boss that you had COVID and you weren't going to be able to go to work. Ole says, no, Lena. I called the boss and I said, dude, I got a case of corona and I'm not going to make it to work today. So I hope you enjoyed your day of the pandemic. Let's talk a little bit about the Bakken. Let's start with where we are. We'll talk a little bit about where we've been, and then we'll talk about where I think we're going. This slide shows you the status as of the end of March in the state of North Dakota. That is an amazing map on the right-hand side of that slide. It shows the capital that you have invested. Hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into the state of North Dakota, paying sales tax, employing our North Dakota citizens, and making this a better place. As you can see up there, we ended the month of March with 16,000 producing wells, We have a lot of inactive wells still, over 2,000 inactive wells, over 600 duck wells waiting on completion, lots of permits. So permitting did not stop during the pandemic year. Y'all are sitting on about a 1-year inventory of permits, and I'm happy to report this morning, 18 rigs running. That's the most that we have had in over 12 months. And so we are gradually climbing back out of the enormous hole that pandemic handed us. Thank you. Thank you. Really excited to report that. Also excited to report, I'll give you a little preview of what's coming out tomorrow, but we're back above 1.1 million barrels a day at 1.13 million barrels a day and over 2.7 BCF of gas a day. So I really believe North Dakota is back, and thank you for that. The number that excites me is one of the last ones there, and that's the 12,095 wells. I've signed orders for another 12,095 wells to be drilled in those Bakken spacing units. So that's a little bit about where we are. Let's talk about where we've been, and this is a funny way to look at it. This is how a census taker looks at what you have done in North Dakota. I find this graph absolutely amazing. So I moved to North Dakota in 1980 during that oil boom. I grew up in South Dakota on a cattle ranch. I spent a couple years in Montana. I found out where the real oil patch was, and I moved to North Dakota in 1980. You can see that we had a boom and a bust in 1980. Anytime that bottom line goes red, we're in a bust. And so the 1980 boom brought people to North Dakota, but more people left at the end of that than came during the 80s boom and bust. That is not what began in 2005. So that line over there in 2005 corresponds with the Robert Hewer well in Divide County and the partial 136 well over there in Mound Trail County. And that's the beginning of the Bakken trend, the Bakken development. From there on, you can see that we have never gone into negative population growth. Even last year, as we worked our way through the pandemic, and at the end, I got a nice little surprise for you to talk about how the state partnered in all of that. But even last year, during the worst of the pandemic, we never have gone into negative territory. We have grown this state in ways that have amazed everybody. Many of you will remember the poppers who said that we should take down all the fences, pull up all the streets, and run buffalo out here, and just let people kind of just wander through and watch the buffalo. It was going to be called the Buffalo Commons. You have proved them wrong. You have proved that North Dakota is a great place to live, a great place to raise children, a great place to work, a great place to invest your capital. And so you have created an environment where our young people stay. That time, those red parts of that line are times when we educated our young people and we sent them out of state. There was nothing here for them to do if they got an education here. So our biggest import, our biggest import was agriculture, okay? But our number 2 import was smart young people that went all around the world, but they left North Dakota. Today, that doesn't happen. They have opportunity here like no one has ever seen before. This is a remarkable graph. And you're going to look at that and say, but Lynn, you can't say that's because of the Bakken. There must be other things going on. So I took a look at what that looks like on a county-by-county basis. Take a look at that one, if you would. McKenzie County, 179% population growth. It nearly tripled. You got to hear from the former mayor of Watford City, a McKenzie County resident. There's some folks in a booth out there. You ought to stop and talk to them about what it's done for McKenzie County. The counties in red on this map had 10% or 9% or greater growth. The counties in yellow had some growth, 1 to 5%. And if you're blue or dark blue, you lost population. We want those guys to come along on the ride too. And you're saying, well, yeah, but there's some counties over there kind of in the middle and on the east. Those aren't Bakken counties. Well, I can tell you that government benefits from the Bakken oil and gas development, all right? So that's that stuff in the center. I can also tell you that Grand Forks and Fargo have benefited tremendously from the Bakken capital investment. What's that little one down there in the southeast corner? That looks like an outlier, doesn't it? That's where Bobcat is. That's where your bobcats are made and where they come from. So if you had a connection to the Bakken development, your population grew, your economy grew, you had a healthy, growing economy over the last decade. If you did not, if you could not connect to the Bakken development, then you didn't. Your population shrunk. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later and talk about some ways we may be able to bring some of those other folks in to this wonderful thing that's been going on. So let's talk, I wanted to show you this, just in case you still doubted it, all right? The map on the left is that population map by county. The map on the lower right is the Bakken geology. They look a lot alike, don't they? So the map on the right is how a geologist or an oil man sees the state of North Dakota. The map on the left is how somebody that builds hotels or invests in city infrastructure or retail sees the state of North Dakota. And it is absolutely an absolute fact that the growth over the last decade has been driven by you. Give yourself a round of applause. Thank you so much. So let's look to the future, the next decade. So we've just looked at what happened over the past decade, and we all understand and remember that, especially Ole. But let's look to the future. I want to talk about three things that I believe have to happen and will happen over the next decade to make North Dakota even better. The first one, and you've already looked at this map, so you've seen some of the numbers up there, but what I want to point out to you is if you total up the waiting on completion, permitted wells, and the already approved increased density wells, it's 14,448 wells. Guess what? It's more than the ones that you've already drilled and put on production. So more than half of the wells that are going to be drilled and producing in the Bakken are yet to be drilled. My point is that over the next decade, there is a lot of drilling and completion work left to do. We are far from done employing drilling rigs, employing frac crews, mining sand, moving water, and building well pads and constructing oil and gas wells across western North Dakota. So the first thing that has to happen over the next decade is to drill those 14,448 wells. That's the first thing, and that's going to keep all of us really active and busy and hopefully investing capital in the state of North Dakota. The second thing that has to happen is we have got to bring value-added natural gas home to our state. It's a dangerous thing to disagree with Kelsey Warren. Kelsey said, we're not going to do this in North Dakota because we can't put our plastic on the water. Well, we'll put it on the rail, all right? I'm going to disagree with Kelsey Warren. The state is all in on making this happen. So when you look at the graph on the right-hand side, what you can see is that we currently have the capacity to deal with our natural gas. And one of the numbers we're going to release tomorrow is you have gotten to 96% gas capture in the state of North Dakota. Give yourself another round of applause. Wow. I remember standing with the governor at a meeting and talking about the fact that you were only capturing 64% of your natural gas. And I remember people looking at the satellite pictures and comparing us to the city of Chicago in terms of the flares that were burning out there. Some of that was bad data, okay, but it's the way people looked at it anyway. And I recall him putting a challenge in front of you. He said, fix this so I don't have to. And so you stood up a gas capture task force, and I went to a lot of meetings, and we had a lot of conversations about how we were going to make that happen. And you invented the idea of gas capture plans, coming in with your permits, the idea of sitting down and meeting with the Industrial Commission on a semi-annual basis to make sure that the operators and the midstreamers were communicating, working on right-of-ways and all of that, and what a remarkable story that is. So we've gotten to the point where we can capture 96% of the gas at our current production. But you heard Justin talk yesterday, or I hope you heard Justin talk, and if you didn't, I hope you download his slides, because this graph is conservative. He's now re-looking at the Bakken and how it's really going to behave in terms of gas-oil ratio, and we're actually going to make more gas than what those three curves show on that graph. What are we going to do with all of that gas? Well, I trust that you want to turn that gas into cash. So there's some things that we can do. Enhanced oil recovery using that gas. Gathering and processing expansion, that's a given. We have to get to every well that is entirely physically possible to gather and process that gas. We are going to have a hard time exporting all that natural gas. So we have to figure out how to turn some of that gas into electrons. The world that we live in, the country that we live in, wants electrons. They're not so crazy about natural gas molecules. They don't understand them. That's why they don't want them. But if we can turn it into electrons, they know they want electrons because they know that they have to charge their iPhone. All right, that's the one known out there. And I know, I'm sorry, it's just reality. We are going to have to figure out how to store natural gas liquids, and we're working on that. We need to bring petrochemical processing to the state of North Dakota. That will bring a minimum $10 billion investment, a minimum 1,000 jobs to northwestern North Dakota. It will create decades of economic activity, and the secondary effects of that will be beyond what we have already seen. We do need to expand our natural gas liquid pipelines moving out of the state, and we need to expand our gas export pipelines. But there is a limit to how far we can go with those pipelines. And so we have to figure out those top 5 things in order to augment that. So number one thing, we have to be committed to drill those 14,448 wells. The number 2 thing is we have to be all in on bringing value-added natural gas to our state of North Dakota. And the third thing, and I've already kind of touched on this, is we've got to crack the code on enhanced oil recovery. And so you've heard some presentations here at this conference, and if you hadn't, go and download the slides. But I've put 3 really shining examples up here of the work and the sweat that's going into cracking the code on enhanced oil recovery. We've got some young North Dakotans born and raised in North Dakota that have invented a surfactant process that recovers huge additional amounts of oil from wells that are down in the 20 to 40 barrel a day range. They've got hard proof now of wells on production and what happens within the first month or 2 after they put those wells back on production. They have the potential to increase the recovery from those wells, to double the recovery from those wells. The EERC has been studying. There's been 7 attempts at enhanced oil recovery in the Bakken, and some almost successes, some near misses, but nobody has cracked the code yet. And we have some wonderful grad students and professors at the University of North Dakota who are also working on different ways to do enhanced oil recovery in the Bakken and Three Forks. So the third thing that I believe will happen and has to happen over this next decade is to crack the code on enhanced oil recovery. If we do those 3 things, and I believe we will do those 3 things, but it will not be easy, all right? I want you to look at this chart, and you can see on the left-hand side of this chart, the state of North Dakota is all in with you. We want to partner with you. We have programs like you cannot believe to invest in your research, to invest in your business, to help you commercialize it, to help you get rid of your carbon, to help you use that carbon to make more carbon. We are all in. We have set up the regulatory and tax and legislative and governing policies to make this state your partner. That's what the left-hand side of that shows. There's some folks in the rest of the country, not so much, all right? And so I've got a down arrow on the other side because you can see already in the first 120 days the federal policies that are pushing back. One of the ones that concerns me the most, and we're going to be talking about a resolution at the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, is this Clean Future Act. Give it a read sometime when you're really bored. It's 952 pages. But hidden in that 952 pages is every policy you can think of to make oil and gas disappear. Every policy you can think of is in that Clean Future Act. It is an unmitigated disaster. We will be all in on helping you resist that and overcome that. Some good news is our own legislators in Washington, D.C. have sponsored the Revive Economic Growth and Reclaim Orphan Wells Act. And that's going to allow us to continue the program that we invented here of making sure that North Dakota is not left with a legacy of orphan wells when all is said and done. It's a program that's going to offer up to $25 million a year to states like North Dakota from the Department of Energy through the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission to bring states like Pennsylvania and Texas to the place where North Dakota is, where you can count the orphan wells in 3 digits or 2 digits, not in 7 digits, all right? And so that's really great. And we heard such good news about the Dakota Access Pipeline yesterday. I could just feel such a sigh of relief in this room when Mr. Warren made the statement that he made about the Dakota Access Pipeline. But, so remember this, on the left-hand side, the state wants to be your partner. If you have an idea, if you want to invest capital, if you want to make North Dakota a better place, give us a call. We will find somebody for you to talk to about a research program, about a grant, about partnering, about sharing, about loaning you money to make that happen. And I promise you, we will stand alongside of you to resist all of that nonsense on the right-hand side of that graph. Thank you. So I hope that when we talk 10 years from now, that the 10-year census looks like this, that not only are our core Bakken counties seeing double and triple digit economic growth and population growth, but we'll bring some of these guys around the edges in too. We talked about the Clean Sustainable Energy Authority, and that should bring that county right in the center of the state back up and participating with us as a partner of providing carbon dioxide to the oil and gas industry for enhanced oil recovery. But I believe 10 years from now, we can look at a census map and see something like this. And so what will that look like when we look at it on a statewide basis? It's going to look like this. We're going to double down on what we did over the last 10 years. I want to finish and leave you with these words, because I said it's not going to be easy. This is one of the most inspiring things that was ever said to the American people. In September of 1962, John F. Kennedy said this about going to the moon. And you heard the governor say, yes, hey, this challenge I'm putting in front of you is not a moonshot. Well, the challenge I've put in front of you this morning is kind of a moonshot. But here's what he had to say, and we'll read it slowly together and let it sink in. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they're easy, okay? So the 3 things I've put in front of you, we're not going to do them because they're easy. We're going to do them because they're awesome, all right? But because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one that we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win, and the others too. That's my challenge to you today for the next 10 years. We can do this together if we will be partners. Thank you so much. This is how you find us if you have an idea. Thank you. I have one more thing I want to share with you, because the pandemic was incredibly hard for this state and for your industry. And so, kind of proving the point that I made earlier, that the state of North Dakota is your partner in good times and bad, we have a video that we want to show you about how we came alongside your oil and gas industry to help you through the worst year that your industry had ever experienced in the state of North Dakota.
2020 was a challenging year for us. It actually started out in January and February, fairly good months. Well, then March hit, and the pandemic caused the oil price to collapse. And then we basically were at a standstill.
It was devastating, and to a level that we have never seen before. You know, what did companies do? Well, we saw immediately as they started pulling everything in. They dropped the drilling rigs. We came to about March 8th of 2020. Saudi Arabia and Russia began their price war about curtailing production. It just absolutely decimated this industry, the oil and gas industry.
When March hits and you come to a screaming halt, it's sleepless nights, wondering what you're going to do next and how long is it going to last.
What happened is a lot of people lost their jobs. Good, solid, long-term workforce was put out of business.
The whole world was affected by it, so obviously there were also no jobs and, you know, people getting laid off. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be working.
Eventually, you know, the CARES Act money comes, and our Governor Burgum, working with state officials, decided one of the allocations of that money would be to the North Dakota Industrial Commission and our director, DMR director, Lynn Helms, to take care of a long-standing problem, and that is capping and a permanent abandon to wells that have been abandoned out in the field.
I was in control of the whole project, so I had to hire all the services, starting from the workover rigs, cement companies, roustabouts, water trucks, anything to do with plugging the wells.
We had 3 to 4 rigs going, being that it was such a tight deadline that, you know, we really had to make sure everything was going efficiently. If I had one guy in Burke County, I had to make sure that all the wells he was going to stays in Burke County, because there's no point having all these rigs travel back and forth.
One of the criteria they wanted set up was that we had to use all North Dakota companies that had a home base in North Dakota. Wanted to make sure this money recirculated in North Dakota, so if this thing came back, they had people to work. You know, that was the big thing with this CARES Act money. We wanted to save the services, save this experience. It kept that experience in the state instead of letting these guys leave because they didn't have a job. Oil's kind of come back now. We've got experienced people still working on these wells instead of having to retrain people, and the cost of retraining these people is astronomical.
That's a lot of invoices, processing that and approving, making sure that that is exactly what we did, and then a fast turnaround, sending that to the state so then we can pay these vendors right away, because that was one of the goal here is to keep these North Dakota businesses in business.
It was perfect timing to have something like this that took care of a problem for the state, put a lot of good people to work, and keep them around for when the industry got back on its feet.
The roustabouts haul the rods and tubing. We sold it to all the landowners. I sold all the pumping units to one company. And then when it was done, we issued a check to the state for over $250,000.
Fast forward to 2021, oil prices rebounded. There's some optimism in the industry. Companies are starting to put wells back online. Projects are starting up again. So thanks to the P&A project, we were able to keep 100% of our staff on. It helped everyone a lot and took away the sleepless nights. It was the best project I've been involved in, for sure.
We ended up plugging 280 wells. We reclaimed 143 wells, plus 640 acres of land we put back into production. We reclaimed a 50-mile abandoned pipeline, saved about $1 million on costs.
Thank you for all you have done for this state that I love so much. Keep up the good work. Have a great morning.
Thank you, Lynn, for your presentation, and thank you also for taking the leadership on the plugging program. It sort of became a model for other states in the country. Our next guest is Chris Kendall. Chris is a CEO and member of the board of directors at Denbury, Inc. Chris joined Denbury as Chief Operating Officer in September of 2015 and was named President in October of 2016. He was appointed to his current role as Director and CEO effective July 1, 2017. Prior to joining Denbury, Chris was with Noble Energy. Please help me give Chris a warm welcome.
Thank you, Lawrence. Well, thank you, Lawrence. And, listening to Lynn speak, I think, is just a great start to our presentation here. I'm going to talk about Denbury, and I hope many of you know Denbury. I think many of you may not, and I'm looking forward to sharing our story with you. But listening to Lynn talk about the opportunities in North Dakota, specifically around enhanced oil recovery, that's something very near and dear to our heart, and you'll see that as we go through the upcoming slides here. We're excited about EOR. We've got a lot going on right here in North Dakota that I think is important. And what I'd like to do is talk about that, and then maybe talk about some bigger things that I see as opportunities right along the lines of what Lynn was talking about. So first, let's take a look at Denbury. And this slide, we show a few things, but what I'd want you to focus on is first, just where we are. We have two key operating regions, the Gulf Coast, kind of spanning from Mississippi, Louisiana, and on into Texas. That's where Denbury started. But our new growth area, where we've entered within the last decade, around 2010, is in the Rockies. And you'll see us here in Wyoming, Montana, and in North Dakota, just in this great Cedar Creek anticline field that crosses the border from Montana into North Dakota. And that's a lot of our focus, and it's an exciting thing to be looking at, and we'll talk about that. Our focus as a company has been primarily on enhanced oil recovery. Enhanced oil recovery using carbon dioxide. And that's a technique that started years ago when we had this thought that peak oil was a real issue in terms of supply and that there would never be enough oil in the world. And maybe that's shifted some, but the technique is still important. And it's important now for some different reasons. It does things with carbon dioxide that the world needs, and we think it opens up some great opportunities for our industry. And I'll tell you about that in a few slides. The company's producing about 50,000 barrels a day, split between these two regions. And what we're looking to do is grow this company, grow the business right here in this Rocky Mountain region, right here in North Dakota. As a CO2 EOR-focused company, our assets are very aligned with that. And so as you look at these two maps, and you'll see some pipelines connecting our fields that are shown in those green drops. Well, those pipelines, they're not oil pipelines, they're not natural gas pipelines, they're CO2 pipelines. We have over 1,000 miles of CO2 pipelines across these two regions, and we're building more even this year, and I'll tell you about that. So it's hard for me to talk about the company and what we do without starting with safety. Safety, and I hope it's the same with all of you, is a foundation of what we're all about. I believe, that the best business that we can have is one that is safe. And I don't mean just keeping Denbury's employees safe, I mean keeping everybody that touches our business safe. If it is a contractor that's doing work for us, if it's a vendor who's setting foot on our property, we want to look out for all of our brothers and sisters just like we look out for our own family. And we've been doing a great job of that. I was honored a couple years ago for Denbury to receive the Excellence in Safety Award from the North Dakota Petroleum Council for this Zero by Choice program that we had put together, really focused on just driving a culture that better safety is not acceptable. We need to be focused on an incident-free workplace. And I'm happy to say that we have been progressing steadily and setting records on a yearly basis on our safety performance, and we truly see that in the culture of the company. Very excited about that, and we're on track to do even better this year. So many of you, I'm sure, know a lot about CO2 enhanced oil recovery. I'm sure most of you know more than I know about it, but I wanted to just touch on it a bit because I think that there might be some in the audience who don't know about it, at least at this level, that I want to share with you. What's interesting is that we use carbon dioxide, and at the right reservoir conditions, we are able to get the carbon dioxide to act as a solvent running through a depleted oil field. And as you know, getting the oil out of the rock is a process that is not easy. Primary recovery is often in the neighborhood of 20% of the oil that's in place. So we leave 80% of the oil there. We keep working it, often moving to water floods in these conventional reservoirs. But again, you're really in that 20% range. Still, you have 60% of the oil left in the ground. And that's where the opportunity for enhanced oil recovery comes in. Using that property of carbon dioxide, we're able, on average, to get in that same neighborhood as either primary or secondary recovery will gather, and we can do that with a couple of important caveats that go along with it. Number one, we're using the same footprint. We are working within fields that have already been developed, and we have communities that have been built around it. We're using the disturbed land that's already been disturbed. It's a very friendly practice from a footprint standpoint. Importantly, though, when we use carbon dioxide to extract oil in this manner, essentially 100% of the carbon dioxide that we ever use stays in the ground. And that's not commonly known. You think about the CO2 that we use, we push it through a reservoir, it touches oil, it comes out in a combination with the oil, we separate it, and we put it back in the reservoir. And so we're going through that cycle, but ultimately, nearly 100% of that CO2 stays permanently in the ground. And so in a world where we're really looking at what do we do with carbon dioxide, this is a great solution. And I'm going to talk some more about that going forward. So you've probably heard a lot about carbon capture, use, and storage, CCUS. It's in the news every day. It's something that, honestly, I'd say a year ago, we thought about quite a bit, but you certainly didn't hear it the way you hear it today. And the reason I want to spend a little bit of time touching on this today is because I think that carbon capture, use, and storage and enhanced oil recovery is a subset of that. It's a use of CO2 that leaves the CO2 in the rock. But I think this is an opportunity that is different. It lets us use our technology, our assets, our people that have grown up working through oil and gas. We can use those same skills to put CO2 in the ground. And so what we're doing with CCUS, we have EOR, but with government policy, and there's a policy that's been put in place, it's called the 45Q tax credit, actually provides a credit for CO2 that's captured, transported, and permanently put underground. And today it's $50 a ton. And so there's a business that can be built around that, and it can use the same skills that we have right here in this industry. And so to me, when I think about the challenges that we face, we have CCUS that will need to be used to take more CO2 out of the air. And just to put that in perspective, the IEA, one of the world's foremost authorities on energy, when they estimate the tools that are available to us to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, certainly their top two are wind and solar. But you might be surprised to know that the number 3 tool is CCUS. In fact, they estimate that by 2040, we'll need to have used CCUS to put 11 billion tons of CO2 underground. So there's a great opportunity here, and with the geology that we have right here in North Dakota and the expertise that we have, I think there's an unbelievable opportunity. So the next few slides, what I'd like to do is turn to Denbury specifically. The opportunity that I just spoke of is fabulous, but I want to share with you what we're doing right now and why it matters right here in North Dakota. So this is a close-up map that looks in a little more detail at our Rocky Mountain region. The Rocky Mountain region spans, like I mentioned, from Wyoming into Montana and then right here into North Dakota with the southern extent of the Cedar Creek Anticline and our Cedar Hills South field. And what you'll see on this, essentially, it's a CO2 business. So we take our CO2 off of Exxon's plant down in southwestern Wyoming at Chute Creek. The CO2 runs through a pipeline system. Right now, it's primarily being used in our Bell Creek field, which is on the Montana-Wyoming border. But what we're particularly excited about right now is this year, we've budgeted around $150 million in our 2021 budget to build a 105-mile CO2 pipeline that will run from that Bell Creek field right into the Cedar Creek Anticline field, and then a lateral beyond that will run into North Dakota and enable us to initiate a flood a CO2 flood in that Cedar Creek Anticline field. So I'll show you some details on that, but I just wanted to give you kind of the lay of the land of what we're doing here. This project, we expect to start getting this pipeline in the ground beginning next month. So this is a real pipeline project. Honestly, in a world that, as we've heard, is not that easy to get pipeline projects going, but this is permitted and it's ready to go. Before I come off of this slide, I'd also mention just a minor acquisition that Denbury had made in the first quarter of this year with the Beaver Creek and Big Sand Draw fields there more in central Wyoming. And that's an asset that we acquired in a tough time in the industry, but they make a lot of sense for us, as I'm sure you can see just from looking at the slide here. Next two slides, I want to really show you what Cedar Creek Anticline project looks like. To us, we're thrilled to be able to start a brand new enhanced oil recovery project right here in North Dakota and on into Montana as well. If you look at Cedar Creek Anticline, many of you know that and many of you worked there, but the anticline itself is an incredible structure. The map I'm showing here runs about 90 miles from north to south, so it's very extensive. And as such, we need to break it into phases when we're going to develop it. And so our initial phase is this phase one that catches two key fields: the Cedar Hills South field, right here in North Dakota, and the East Lookout Butte field, just on the other side of the border. So our plan is to bring this pipeline in, and we'll have it installed by the end of this year, and we'll start moving CO2 into those two fields in the early part of next year, and we'll start to see production come up within about a year and a half or so after we start injection. So it's a very exciting project, and it's one that can continue to build as we go forward. We will bring CO2 and we'll expand ultimately, I think, throughout the entire field that you see here on this slide. Very exciting. It's also exciting just from the potential that we see here. So much oil that is still in place along the lines of what I showed earlier that we think we can ultimately recover. In fact, we think the amount that we can ultimately recover is greater than the total proved reserves that the company has today. So here I want to show you something that I think is very surprising about enhanced oil recovery. And as I mentioned earlier, the CO2 stays in the ground. When we take CO2 from captured industrial sources and put that in the ground, it does an amazing thing for the balance of carbon dioxide through the whole course of your project. Now for us in the oil and gas industry, we think about the emissions associated with our business, right? And we have the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, and those are direct and indirect. And those are pretty easy to think about. It's hard for us in oil and gas to talk about emissions without talking about Scope 3 emissions. And Scope 3 emissions are those that come from the combustion of the product that we produce. And honestly, in a lot of cases, it's why folks don't like us as much, is because they look at that and they see that as a label on all of us. But what I want to show you here is it's not necessarily the case. When we use captured CO2 in EOR, we're offsetting those emissions. And we've shown specifically in the graph on the lower left-hand side of this slide how that works out for our phase 1 and phase 2 of this project right here in North Dakota and in Montana. So the combination of all these emissions 77 million tons for phases 1 and 2. Now, I would say 80 to 90% of that is scope 3 associated with that combustion of our produced product. But the CO2 that's being captured from an industrial source that's being injected is greater than the amount of emissions. So if you just let that soak in for a minute, it's something that is a little bit counterintuitive, but we need to use a lot of CO2 to get a barrel of oil out of the ground. And in fact, when we look at that whole balance, for this project specifically, we have a negative 8 million tons over the life of those phases 1 and 2 of this project. And when I just divide that out on a per barrel basis, that means that for every barrel that we produce, we're permanently reducing CO2 over all that scope by about 130 pounds. So every barrel is reducing about 130 pounds of CO2. And we're very excited about that. When we look at Denbury as a whole, we use a combination of industrial source CO2 and natural CO2. Right now, about 25% of our production comes from industrial source CO2. And on average, this number is even greater for us, just with the nature of the different reservoirs that we're putting CO2 in. And so what we want to do is we want to continue to replace that natural CO2 with industrial CO2. That industrial CO2 is going to be incented by these government policies that are in place to capture and put it away. And then we see the company moving even greater towards a neutrality point on overall emissions, which is a pretty hard thing to do for an energy company here. A couple other details before I leave this slide I want to share with you are the production. What I love about EOR fields, and many of you would see this, is they last a very long time. It's a process that, in this case, we expect will keep this field running for many decades into the future. We have a heavy capital investment this year, primarily associated with the pipeline that we'll be putting in, but from that point on, we can continue to feed capital at a lower level and to continue to develop that field and expand it as we go. And it'll work within cash flow, certainly at today's prices, but honestly, even at prices that are much lower than what we see here today. So very exciting time for Denbury, very exciting project that we're working on. And like I said, we're particularly excited about what it means to North Dakota. What I'd also like to share is as we thought about bringing this pipeline up to North Dakota, we had a certain need for the field, and we calculated that and came up with a pipeline size that we think works quite well. But then we thought about it a little more. And I go back to even what Lynn was saying just a few minutes ago about the possibilities for EOR in North Dakota. And we think about the whole Bakken and what's the technical work that's being done there and what those possibilities are as well. It's very exciting. And we saw the potential for something bigger. And so early in the design here, we said, we need a 12-inch pipeline to get the CO2 for the field. Let's upsize the pipeline and make sure we have sufficient extra capacity to let other exciting things happen here in North Dakota. And so it's a 16-inch pipeline. And instead of having a limit on the order of 180 or 200 million cubic feet of CO2 a day, with the right provisions, we can get the 16-inch line up to 500 million cubic feet a day or so. So a lot of extra capacity is there, and it's exciting to think about just what we can do with all of that. I think there's an exciting future that can go in many different directions, whether it's EOR in other parts of North Dakota, or whether it's CCUS, where we're taking captured CO2 off of power plants or other industrial sources and putting it permanently underground, using the skills and assets that the industry already has in place here. Very exciting. So wrapping up, I just want to highlight a few things that I'd want you to take away about Denbury. Number one, in an industry that is very diverse and you run into a lot of different basins, different areas of focus, I think you'll find that Denbury has a unique focus with 60% of our production coming from enhanced oil recovery and a focus on building that and building into CCUS, whether it is with EOR or otherwise. We think our skills can get us there. And those skills were developed over 20 years of running EOR fields. Through all these ups and downs that we've seen since the turn of the century, this company has become stronger and better at working with CO2. And today's world, that's essential. There's a lot of talk about infrastructure and what's needed to make CCUS happen in a bigger way. And right here today, Denbury has 1,000 miles of CO2 pipelines in the ground between our two regions, and we're building another 105 miles right here this year. So we're very excited about the infrastructure that we have. We have set a goal as a company by the end of this decade to be negative on a Scope 3 emissions basis. And the way we'll do that is, honestly, it's by doing more of what we're already doing. We think we can get there. And then finally, we're a company that has the financial strength and flexibility and the focus to get us there. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Our next speaker is here to present on midstream operations. Bob Phillips currently serves as Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of Crestwood Equity Partners, LP, which he founded in October of 2010. Mr. Phillips has more than 42 years of experience in the energy industry. He previously served as President, Chief Executive Officer of Enterprise Products Partnership, LP, and prior to that, he served as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Gulf Terra Energy Partners, LP, and prior to that, he was the Chief Executive Officer of East Tex Energy, Inc. Please help me welcome Bob Phillips.
Thanks, Lawrence, and good morning to everybody. It's a little bit bigger crowd than I expected on the third day of a conference in Bismarck, but it means you weren't too rowdy last night around town. That's good. I do understand that they ran out of wings at the local pub, which is probably a good thing for the economy. We're staying at the Hampton Inn and had a delightful chat with the lady that runs it. She's understaffed, but she's excited. She's done more business in the last 3 days than she did all of last month, so that's a good sign for the local economy. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to Ron Ness and the entire team for putting on a great conference, a revival, if you will, of the Bakken. Last year was a tough year on everybody, and I'm really glad to see that people are back. There's a spring in our step. We're optimistic about the future and really optimistic about the Bakken. Ron asked me to give the midstream perspective. You know, we're all in this together. It's a wellhead to burner tip business to make the Bakken a great shale play in America. It's very competitive out there for capital allocation. Many of our producer customers that have already given speeches over the last couple of days constantly talk about how challenging it is to get capital allocated. Many of you are just Bakken players, and as a result, this is where you make your money. This is where you live, and this is where you work, and so your dollars stay here in North Dakota. But many of the operators are large-scale operators that have other choices to drill. So part of the central theme that I guess I'll be talking about for the next few minutes is how we work together as a great supply chain to make sure that the hydrocarbon products that we produce here in the Bakken are not only competitive, but they get to market, and they get to market quickly with good access. And then we take the cash that we make from all this capital investment and redeploy here into the local community. So it's an exciting time. We spent some quality time with Governor Burgum and Chairman Fox of the MHA yesterday. Great to see them working together, collaborating on how we can improve things here in North Dakota throughout the industry. It's a great partnership. You guys are very lucky as an industry to have Doug Burgum providing real leadership here. He and the team are fabulous. They do a great job for the industry. They make it easy on us because they're businessmen too. So congratulations to them and the entire team that the state and the commitment that they make to the oil and gas industry. You know, I walked in when Lynn was giving his speech, and I'm reminded every time I see Lynn that I think of myself as a Bakken cheerleader, but Lynn is actually a Bakken ambassador. So I only hope that we can stay in the business long enough to elevate our knowledge of the Bakken and our ability to influence capital allocation up to this basin as well as he does. He's a fabulous resource for the industry. I marvel at the amount of data that he and his team have and how well they use it, and the leadership that they provide in trying to lead the industry towards the next big thing. And I'm not surprised that enhanced oil recovery is beginning to come up in the conversation. I was impressed by the fact that he thought there's 16,000 wells yet to be drilled in this basin, and that's far more than a decade of inventory. So really pleased about that. Let me give you my bona fides real quickly. I think Lawrence asked me if I was the Crestwood E&P company, and I said, no, I'm not. Crestwood's a midstream company, and we're really pleased and proud to be here. I do think of myself as a Bakken cheerleader. We've been here since 2012. We've invested over $2 billion in midstream infrastructure. We have a fabulous workforce here, all native North Dakotans. They're really plugged into the community. They have deep roots, and we really invest in the community as much as possible, so I really appreciate my team. Having said that, Crestwood is a public company, like a lot of the companies up here, and so we're constantly dealing with investors and investors' perspective about the Bakken. Now, none of us have made the commitment to this basin that Harold Hammond Continental have, and so he's the real ambassador for the industry, and I think as his view of the basin and our industry continues to improve, then we should all feel that great sense of confidence that we're past all the pain and suffering of last year and we're headed towards better times. Certainly from a Crestwood perspective, this is the most important asset that we have in our portfolio. We operate the Arrow gathering system on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, the Bear 10 processing complex, and the Colt Hub, which is the leading crude by rail facility in the basin. And so we provide a wide range of midstream services, as do other midstream companies, and you know the names of the companies that have been here for the last decade and invested money like we have. My perspective is a little bit different, though. I get to see all the basins because we've got assets from the Marcellus to the Delaware Permian to the Bakken to the Powder River Basin to the Barnett and around the country, and so we get to take a hard look at the basin on a daily basis, and let me tell you, this is a great basin to do business. It's a low-cost basin. It's essential to the U.S. being able to produce 11 to 12 million barrels a day, which we know is critical to America's security and American energy independence. This is absolutely a vital basin, and so we should treat it as such. I will tell you that we think the U.S. oil and gas fundamentals are improving. Activity levels are increasing, not just here slowly, but in all the other major basins that are oil-weighted. Investors are coming back to the sector. Talk a little bit about that. That's a positive thing because we've largely lost investment in oil and gas, both upstream, midstream, and downstream. But we've got to maintain our capital discipline to be able to keep the investors coming back and make this an attractive investment opportunity as we move forward. There's certainly challenges with the Biden administration, the wholesale change in regulatory oversight. We'll talk about some of that, but we'll move forward. The one thing that I'll probably hammer home more than anything else is the importance of ESG competitiveness to keep the Bakken a competitive basin with other basins out there. Now, all the speakers, as I've observed them, have had different forms of ESG policies and practices, but we as an industry need to embrace this on a formal and institutional level and really put out to our investors and to the market and to regulators all the things that we're doing from an environmental, a social, and a governance standpoint to improve their view of our industry, and that's the real reason for doing that. And we've got to work together as an industry, from the wellhead to the burner tip. It's no more producers and then gathering companies and then processing companies and then the pipelines take it away. We've all got to work together to be able to do that. Where we start at Crestwood is around customer service. And if my guys have gotten anything right at all, they absolutely provide some of the best customer service of any gatherer or processor in the business. I might just direct you to some of the recent recognition that we've had for a number of years in a row now. One of the many different research firms out there, Energy Point Research, listed Crestwood as #1 in gas transportation. That's our Marcellus business. We move about 3 BCF a day of gas at their critical gas transportation storage infrastructure to feed into the Northeast utility market. That's a critical piece of business, and we consistently rank #1 there. Service and professionalism is our marketing, supply, and logistics business. That's our trucks, our rail, our marketing guys, the guys that move product here in Bakken, not just through the gathering line, but to get it to market at a high netback. We have been rated again #1 in the Bakken Dakotas for gathering services, and I'm really proud of that. And our Texas intrastate business has done quite well in the last year or two also. Quick look at Crestwood. Lawrence asked me if I was the Crestwood E&P company. I said, no, I'm the Crestwood Midstream company. He said, oh, that's funny. There's already a company here named Crestwood. I said, no, Lawrence. I named this company after the street that I live on, so I know this is the real Crestwood. Crestwood's a company that we started 10 years ago in 2010. We've been buying and building assets across the United States. As you can see, we operate in the Delaware and the Barnett in Texas and in the Powder River Basin. It's a big area for us. In the Northeast Marcellus, both in the rich gas play and the dry gas play. But our most important asset in our portfolio is here in the Bakken. And that's why I'm here. We spend a lot of time here. We spend a lot of money. And we will continue to be a long-term player in the Bakken for years. As we move forward, let's talk a little bit about our assets and where we are as a midstream company and where the entire midstream industry is. You know, on the left is just a list of the things that we do and who we do it with. We're blessed to have great partners on the system, our producers, Devon WPX, XTO, Interplus, Rimrock, Petra Shale, and just recently Oasis bought the old QEP acreage out. We couldn't be more happy with the partnership that we have with those producers. It's important that we communicate. We can't overbuild or underbuild. We need to right time build to make sure there's capacity available at the wellhead for all the products. We move gas, gas liquids, crude, and water. So we have a 3-phase gathering system, and that enables us to be able to work with our producers to make sure we have adequate compression, adequate pipeline, we can get it to the processing plant, adequate capacity in the processing plant, and then downstream into the market. We use our MSL logistics business to make sure that our customers get their production marketed to the highest value, highest netback market. The challenge for all of us in the midstream, and this is really kind of across the entire industry, is do we have enough capacity to handle the next big step up in production? So if you look at the graphs on the right, probably a little difficult from the back of the room, but top left is crude gathering. You can see our gathering capacity is up 90% in the last 4 years. We've spent over $600 million just in the last 4 years on this system and the processing plants to ensure that our producers have adequate capacity to develop their acreage on the FBIR. On the top right is water gathering. We've got plenty of capacity there. Importantly, we spent $120 million over the last 4 years replacing our fiber spar water system because of the leak history that it had from the previous owner of the business and the overall construction that we found when we bought the business back in 2013. So a big improvement not only in water capacity, but also water quality. We're starting to go to reuse, and we're beginning to work with our producers to see how we can be more helpful in managing their business as well. Gas gathering is where the big challenge it is, not only gathering, but processing and then downstream capacity in Northern Border. We're all gonna have to work together to ensure that we have adequate gas gathering, processing, and downstream capacity. And then processing, a big jump there. We historically offloaded our gas to other companies for processing. We started our own processing business 4 years ago, and so we're handling all that in the value chain. When we think about great customer service, we think about an operational focus that manages the business on a day-to-day basis. We're constantly worried about and talking about pressure management. We're constantly debottlenecking local constraints on the system, adding another compressor here, looping a line there, working with our producers. The way we do that is through total transparency and communication with our customers about their development plan. As you can see, with 6 different major producers on the reservation, you know, they're oftentimes all drilling and completing at the same time. Oftentimes, maybe it's staggered a little bit. So we work hand in hand with our producer customers to make sure that we have adequate capacity, eliminating flaring, reducing the number of trucks on the road, and minimizing our footprint is absolutely a collective goal that we have to get better at as an industry and as we go forward. So our 2 big assets are the Colt Hub, located over by Williston. It's the largest crude by rail loading facility in the industry. At its peak, we were doing 150, 160,000 barrels a day before DAPL. Now we run about 50 to 70,000 barrels a day. It is a very important part of our business and allows us to make sure that all of our producer customers' barrels flow. If they can't get it into a pipe downstream of the Arrow system, we can truck it over to Colt and get it out to market there. You'd be surprised at how positive the netbacks are in the rail market today. I think we all experienced that last year when there was a possibility of a DAPL shutdown. Producers fanned out, started moving barrels into other pipelines, earning long-term capacity, moving barrels back to rail again, and I think they were quite satisfied with the overall netback. So there's a real integrated system there for us. The crown jewel of our Bakken assets, though, is the Arrow gathering system, which is located on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. And as I pointed out, we are a 3-product system, which allows us to very, very carefully and on an optimized basis make sure that we've got room for all of our producers' products while we are reducing our environmental footprint. So really proud about how those 2 assets have developed over the years, how they're interconnected, and how great a job we do not only at the wellhead to manage pressure and optimize facilities and capacity given the different development plans that our customers have out there, but how we get their production to market with the greatest flow assurance and the highest possible netback. That's the goal of every midstream company. Going forward, Crestwood has been a leader in the industry across the midstream as a sustainability company. Now, again, we all talk about great safety performance. We've been giving back to the community for years. This is a very charitable industry. What we've never done, though, is we've never institutionalized all that data so that investors and regulators can compare from company to company what their real ESG or sustainability program is. I started back in 2018. We hired a team. We started developing our own ESG metrics. We then started talking to our fellow midstream companies about how they would do it. Because I'm on the board of directors of the Energy Infrastructure Council, which is the largest pipeline trade association, and I chair the ESG subcommittee, we got the entire industry to work together to build a template to establish for investors, for rating agencies, and all the capital providers in the industry. Importantly, banks care about this now. Every bank has an ESG department, and we get graded when we go back to the bank to renew our credit facility. We get graded when we go to the capital markets to sell equity or debt on ESG. So we have been pushing on a sustainability program for 3 years. We will file our 3rd sustainability report in June of this year for last year, and it is a absolutely critical part of the industry if you're going to be a producer or a player, a midstream player in this business. Just a quick timeline to give you a sense for how all this works. It's not just hiring somebody or some consultant that knows how to calculate your emissions and then making a filing somewhere. It's a process, and it's a long-term process, and it's here to stay. And the reason why is because everybody's watching our industry. So as we grow as a company, as midstream goes as an industry, as oil and gas in general continues to grow, we all have to follow the same path. We have to join environmental partnerships, whether it's a formal affiliation or just a group of companies. We have to get rated by the rating agencies, MSCI, Sustainalytics, Bloomberg. We have to work hard at the local level to get certifications for land and biodiversity measures. All these things we're doing, the industry needs to do it across the entire industry. Social injustice is a big issue in our industry. And again, bankers and the capital markets and regulators are watching us. So all this is important. It's an ongoing process. We'll continue to build on it. I guess just quickly on the Bakken, we're really excited about where the Bakken is right now. Things are clearly improving. There is a long runway of inventory here. We've got 12,000 inventory locations. Lynn has 16. He's the expert. 16,000 well locations is a long time, guys. At current rig rates, it's kind of forever for anybody in this room. For the guys like me that have been around for a long time, we can see 3 or 4 years down the road, we can see a pickup in rig rates, we can see an increase in volumes. We know that the infrastructure is there to get that oil and that gas to market, but really the Bakken is in great shape. And the reason why is because it's great rock. I'm sure many of you have seen these slides which identify the different acreage into Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. If you haven't, it's quite a study. It's worth a look. But at $60 a barrel and $2.75 gas price, all 4 tiers are economic in this basin, and they will get drilled eventually. We're starting to see M&A activity inside the basin and outside the basin. That's a good thing. That means capital's coming back after COVID, and people are agreeing on deals, are agreeing on acreage values. Most importantly, we know that as a midstream industry, we've got to stay ahead of this to continue to build capacity to make sure that the economics can work for our producers at current prices. Now, this is a really difficult slide to see from the back of the room, but at the top, it's just a quick listing of crude prices the way we think about Bakken crude. And Bakken is in the middle. This was from a couple of days ago. I'm sorry I didn't update it, but it's up $1.50 from there. All these prices up $1.50. The Bakken is in the middle. Spot price $63. You can sell the rest of Cal 21 if you want to hedge it at 61.5. And you can sell Cal 22 right now. That number yesterday morning was 58.75. So you can almost sell Cal 22 for $60. All these acreage positions are economic at $60 Cal 22. Then when you look across the chart with the NYMEX on the left, that's basically the WTI. Brent is essentially the European number, Bakken in the middle, Guernsey's the Powder River, Midland is the Delaware, and USGC is the Gulf Coast. Bakken's pretty darn competitive across all those basins. So the story that we hear from our major friends that have choices in the Delaware or the Haynesville or the Eagle Ford or the Bakken, we're competitive from a price standpoint. When you look down below and you compare the spot price to the futures price, the basis differential is surprisingly small, a couple of bucks. That's not a bad basis differential since we've had DAPL hanging over our heads for almost a year now, right? So as we get more confidence about DAPL that it's going to stay in business, basis tightens, netbacks improve, and we'll see more rig activity because of that. Compare that to the bottom, and it's really hard to see, but the green boxes are Bakken Tier 1 on the far left, and that break even is $30. We can drill and make money at $30. That shows the quality of the rock here in the Bakken. And again, as a cheerleader or an ambassador, I am constantly showing this to my investors. Our customers do have good economics. They have ample takeaway. This is a basin that has longevity to it. We will continue to be there for a long period of time. In fact, the 4 green boxes are the 4 tiers of most of the acreage, and it's all economic at current prices, and producers can hedge forward to lock those prices in. Now we go to infrastructure, and that's always the challenge. It's always been the challenge here, right? But if you add it all up, we've got over 2.5 million barrels a day of oil takeaway capacity when you count rail. And rail was essential 7 or 8 years ago, and it was essential last year during the COVID. And if anything ever happens to DAPL or any of the other pipelines, it's going to be essential. So we've got plenty of takeaway capacity, but the industry needs to continue to work together and collaborate. When you pull it all together, again, I'm the cheerleader for Bakken when I go on CNBC or Fox or Bloomberg or talk to the FERC commissioners like I did last month. We love the Bakken. The Bakken's strong. It's getting stronger. We've seen a lot of M&A activity recently at pretty decent prices, which indicates to us that capital's coming back and investors are actually getting really excited about the Bakken again. We expect, like Lynn did, we expect production to grow this year and next. So what do we do as an industry to keep this good thing going? We've got to have capital discipline. For the first time in history, the Midstream is free cash flow positive. We stopped borrowing money like a drunken sailor, and we're now free cash flow positive. And we're reinvesting in our assets and reinvesting in our communities. And we're working hand in hand with our producer customers to make sure that everybody makes money and we're all free cash flow positive. Because there is no more access to the public markets for oil and gas today. It may come back if we earn their respect, if we continue to generate good returns for our investors, that money will come back. The chart on the right shows energy compared to all the other major economic sectors over the last, year to date. Energy's up 35%, probably up a little bit more after the last couple of days. All positive. Investors are starting to look at our industry again, and we are improving the ability to raise capital. Now, let me just wrap up quickly with a couple of really important thoughts on a local level about ESG and why it's important. For us to maintain the Bakken as a great basin over a long period of time, we've got to smooth out the cycles. We've got to invest when we can and be prepared to develop production and move it to market, but do that in a way that is healthy to the environment, healthy to our local communities, healthy to our investors, and transparent all along the way. And so that's why we keep pounding the table about ESG initiatives. It's the long-term future. Gas capture is the most important one here in the Bakken. It is more important here than it is anywhere else, and that includes the Delaware. And we've got a big operation down there, and literally you can read a newspaper at night with the amount of flaring that goes on there. But we have done it here, and I congratulate all of you for working together. Lynn said it, Governor said it yesterday, even Chairman Fox on the reservation admitted we have met our gas capture goals. At Crestwood, we're below 10%. We're at 9%, which is where we need to be, and it's because we spent $600 million on infrastructure to be able to capture all that gas. The next one is connectivity and flow assurance. We have to continue to work together to make sure we've got adequate takeaway capacity. And if something does happen to DAPL, we are highly confident we can move all of the 1.2 million barrels a day or more of oil production coming out of this basin and get it to a decent market. But to do that, we got to stay on top of it. We got to stay front-footed. We have to continue to invest in infrastructure and work together. Water handling, critically important issue here. Chart on the right shows how many trucks we've taken off the reservation in the last 5 years because of our investment in water handling. That's important to us and our producers. It's an economic function. We get paid for it. It's really important to the MHA nation. And we talk to them about this all the time. We've got to continue as an industry to take trucks off the road. Land restoration and biodiversity. Really proud of my local team here. We just won the Wildlife Habitat Council for our reclamation efforts on the reservation. It's going to be a model for us across the entire industry. We're taking this to the Powder River Basin, where we're the largest gatherer and processor down there. Looking forward to expanding our biodiversity efforts across all the basins that we operate. Really proud of the job the guys have done there. Community investment. You guys have been so charitable over the years. You've continued to invest in scholarship and in job training. We've got to take it to the next level. There's so much additional work yet to be done, particularly with all the social injustice that we're dealing with. Everybody is watching this industry. We need to continue to commit to STEM. We need to commit to scholarship. We've made a big investment in the STEM program here at the colleges, and we are ramping up our scholarship program. Proud to report we actually had our first scholarship winner come back and go to work for the company last year, so really proud about that. And then, of course, our partnership with the tribe is important because we are the largest gatherer on the reservation. We've got a great relationship with them. We continue to work with Mark Fox and the tribal team to reinvest in the community. I'm proud of the Head Start Center that we built a couple of years ago there in Denbury. It's not just symbolic of our community investment, it's symbolic of the partnership between the local communities and the industry, so we need to continue to do that across the board. I think, hey, 30 seconds to go, not bad. Let me just close again with being a cheerleader for the industry. Capital allocation is an important issue for us. This industry is getting close to free cash flow up here in the Bakken. The prices are high enough, which means we don't have to go depend on capital markets activity to raise debt and equity. But we do have a number of producers here that have other choices. They can choose to drill in the Delaware. And so we want to make it easy on them to allocate capital every year to their Bakken development programs by being the kind of midstream partner that really cares about their netbacks, their operations, their flow assurance, and then we all jointly invest in the community together to make North Dakota a better place. Thanks to all that you do for making this industry great. I know last year was a tough year, but this is going to be a really good year for the Bakken, and we're excited to be here and be a part of that. Thank you very much.